Several generations of people walk this earth, and all of us belong to one. Each has its own generational identity.
Ever wonder, why do we group people into these categories, give them the silly names, and do they really say anything about you? Well, as News 3's Max Darrow reports, while a generation may describe some tendencies, it won't define all personalities.
There you go, champ.
Every generation comes with an identity and often a stereotype. This clip pokes fun at millennials and baby boomers.
How'd you get here? Horse?
I drove my car. I own it. After 8 more payments.
What?
How'd you get here?
I took an Uber.
Do not know what that is.
But are those generational generalizations fair? UNLV Associate Professor of Sociology Michael Borer says there really isn't a simple answer.
We need to make sense of the world, so we put people into boxes. But those boxes are often very big, and not everyone fits into the box regardless of how big it is.
Richard Fry of the Pew Research Center says generational categories are necessary to understand how people live through a time of social history and how a generational mark describes the general tendencies of people in their age groups.
I think it is a valid way to try to understand people's attitudes and behaviors.
The Pew Research Center defines the generations by birth year. The silent generation, people born between 1928 and 1945, baby boomers between 1946 and 1964, Gen X between 1965 and 1980, millennials 1981 to 1996, and the post-millennials 1997 and later.
One of the big differences between the millennials and the post-millennials is while they both grew up with technology, the post-millennials grew up with it in the palm of their hands.
And both of those groups are often at odds with the older generations.
And there seems to be this common cultural narrative of, well, what's wrong with the kids these days?
Some people say the younger generations are too attached to their phones, that technology has changed how we interact. Borer says that's nothing new, and it comes with pros and cons.
Technology has always changed us. Think about the 1950s generation, baby boomers, and what television did to that generation.
Some post-millennials, like Sarah Arias, agree that technology goes hand in hand with her generation, but she says that's not necessarily a bad thing.
I feel like we're just in a new era where technology has sprouted, and that's the reason why we are very different from the other generations.
She takes pride in her generational identity, just like Dennis Neumeyer does, on the cusp of the silent and baby boomer generations. He feels that young people worked harder during his time.
Well, I think the millennials got it all mixed up. The harder you work, the more money you make. They expect everything to be handed to them. Oh, you work for it.
Millennial Cole Randall doesn't really hold his generational identity close, and he thinks others should be careful with prejudgment just because of someone's age.
It'll explain a broad sense of things, but as far as who the person is for themselves, it's just a label.
Labels that may describe general tendencies about the group, but not every individual within that generation.
All right, guys, who took my Sheryl Crow album?
Gen X.
Max Darrow, News 3.